record this quick, and then we can look into what happened in the last 3 weeks, and also what's the plan? Like the questions I wrote. What's the plan, and what is the thing we want to get out of Motherland individually and also collectively, and how do we best get there? So that should guide our conversation. I have probably half an hour. At one point, the doorbell will ring because some real estate agent wants to show somebody the apartment. So because I'm trying to sell it. So So with that, I'm curious to hear what happened.
Wow, I'm not sure I'm the right person to give the overview of what happened.
Okay, then but let's try, and then we can move on to the other questions.
Okay, I think just before you went on vacation, there was a meeting which I couldn't make it to. And I believe that the communication I received was that in this meeting, it was decided that the next step was to host a conference or an event of some kind. And the objective then, so two things had been agreed in this meeting. One was that coordination would kind of shift with more responsibility coming onto the continent. And I think with Anesu kind of coordinating this. And secondly, that we should be having a conference or an event, and we should plan this. And so based on that update that I received, a doodle date was circulated. We finally ended up with a day when we could have a meeting, and we had a call. It was also a very interesting scenario because I think Anesu sent out the initial Zoom link. I actually joined with the initial Zoom link, but then it turned out that Anesu couldn't host the meeting on that day. And Tawanda sent another one kind of at the last possible minute. Anyway, I eventually found the right link and joined the call. In terms of what did we discuss, so I found them already having started the meeting. But with that focus in mind, that the next step was to organize an event. And basically it was, I think the initial questions were who should participate. So it was planning an online conference. So the usual kind of questions, participants, what technology should we host it on, etc. So I think there's some very brief notes that Tawanda took that he might be best placed to share. But we had a brief discussion on should we have an agenda, who should be the participants, what date, and etc. We finally didn't arrive at the date because there came up suddenly in the conversation a very kind of discussion on us as a group and how well we know each other as a group and what our group dynamics were, and how to improve that, which was then more about getting to know each other better, and then based on knowing and understanding each other better, building the relationships, and based on us having stronger relationships, arriving at consensus on messaging and consensus on objectives, and then being able to plan a conference on that basis. And my perspective, I think there were kind of two schools of thought. One was a very strong, like, we must do that before we can do anything else. We can't really host a conference without having that, and we need to build this strong foundation to be able to go to kind of what has been identified as the next step, which is hosting a conference. And the other was, well, we've gone so far and we've come to this point where we think the next logical step is to host a conference, and maybe we should trust the process and go on to the next step and see what emerges. And the other thing I guess I would say is that in the background is a big question mark for everyone, because then it came up is, what is it we're working towards? What is our commitment therefore? What do we bring to the table, etc. But then again, of course, then we didn't have enough time to discuss all of those things, and the call kind of ended in the middle of all those discussions. Key next steps that were decided was that we would try to get to know each other better, which was I think around introductions in the Motherland group, which I think there's another WhatsApp group which I'm not yet a member of.
There are two that I'm aware of. So Motherland Core and Motherland is open for everybody to join. And Motherland Core is only the people who are taking part in the active discussion.
Yeah, so I'm in Motherland Core, I think, but I'm not yet in Motherland, the open one. Okay. And I think there was a call for us to introduce ourselves on the Motherland, the general one. I just haven't had time to do that.
Yeah.
And then Herman asked for our email addresses so that he could share some information with us and we could kind of interact with it, which was, he got our email addresses, he shared. But unfortunately, as kind of like in the same sense that I haven't had time to go and introduce myself on the Motherland General Group, I haven't really had time to go through the emails he sends and respond substantively. And I think you came back from vacation just at the point that Herman was getting frustrated because there were no responses.
Yeah.
So this is where we are.
Okay.
This is my understanding of where we are.
Okay. I just added you to that group, so you should be in there now.
Okay. No, I actually wasn't so much about finding the group and joining it. It was more like I really had a lot on my plate and just didn't even have the time to sit down and say, okay, guys, where's the link? Can I join? It was just one. I had other things that were one after the other.
Yeah, so I removed that one hurdle. So now you can, whenever you have time and some space, then you can do an introduction. And I guess I should do that too then. I didn't know about that so far, so I should do that too. So then, okay, so that's interesting. That is that the part of the discussion of why are we actually doing this individually and maybe also collectively was also part of it of your discussion, because that is something that Sebastian and I now felt we should also discuss in the group. We touched upon that several times a little bit, but not really. Yeah, so I can tell you what drives me, but I'm also curious about what drives you. So I can open it and I can tell you what drives me, and then I'll try and make it brief, and then I'd love to hear from you what drives you and what you maybe collectively doesn't make sense in this conversation.
Yeah.
But maybe a reflection on what it might be that could drive us collectively.
Okay.
So I believe that everything we do as humanity on the planet right now will dramatically change in the next 10, 20 years. And there are 5 possible rough future scenarios that I can imagine. And there's one that I believe is the best. So I'm starting with the worst, which is extinction, which is a probable scenario within this century. Then the next one is what I call Mad Max low tech. Do you know the movie Mad Max, or the movies?
Yes, I do.
So that's exactly the images I have in mind when I say Mad Max low tech. Number 3 is what I call Mad Max high tech. That's more let's say the Matrix, but instead of an AI, maybe there's some people left to run that AI, right? So, so dystopian, technology-driven, really bad future. And then number 4, there is Star Trek high tech.
Okay.
So just like the movies, very, very high tech, everything in balance, everybody supported, everybody educated and happy, and general well-being for everyone. And then number 5, there's Star Trek low tech.
Okay.
And Star Trek low tech with the optionality of high tech is what I believe is the not only the most so out of the good ones, the most likely, and also I believe the most desirable, because it makes us more resilient.
Okay.
So out of that comes the notion that the notion mimicked a little bit of the idea of sufficiency economy, proposed in Thailand by the king last century. That the country should be able to support itself and make its population happy, and not care so much about or export. Okay, so people can support themselves, self-reliance. And so with self-reliance, then now starting to build a bridge towards what we're doing with Motherland, comes, why is it, and that's so strange, that there are farmers who go hungry because they don't have money? That's so ridiculous in my mind, because they should be the first to be able to feed themselves, right? So what if we manage by creating positive ripple effects downstream from the last element in the post-harvest value chain, that's where we're at, so that's what we're talking about, towards creating more resilient communities around agriculture across the continent. And of course, starting like in small places, but creating it in a way like an open source solution, or whatever it takes to materialize that everybody, every community can actually start using that and become self-sufficient and self-reliant in terms of food supply. And just stop exporting. What are you exporting for, right? I really don't get it. And so that is my personal motivation. And what I hope is that on a more meta level is that we find some process that we can repeat in other domains, like let's say education, in the continent or in other places. We could also do that in Latin America or Europe or North America or wherever, right? But then we have a process that actually comes from the people, and the people emancipate themselves to do the right thing for themselves. Right? So that's what I'm looking at from a meta level. So we can, what we're doing, use as a blueprint for others to do similar processes, but in other domains and other regions.
Okay.
That's all of my motivation for doing Motherland.
Okay. I have to admit that, I mean, the first few calls and comments and so on that I gave to Motherland was more kind of like in response to what was offered, as opposed to why am I doing this? But after this conversation in our call, then I substantively thought about it and said, okay, what would be my interest? Why am I doing this? Especially because practically not all my work is in agriculture. I mean,
None
and
of
I'm
my
not a
work is
farmer.
in
I'm not.
agriculture.
Yeah, and while I eat food, so of course I'm dependent on farmers, but I'm not, so to speak, dependent on agriculture as an industry for my work or my business. I kind of I haven't thought about the scenarios as much as you have, for example, but I'm also at the place where I think nothing we are doing now is going to be providing solutions for the challenges we face now or we face in the future. Increasingly, I'm finding myself, I think just yesterday I was telling somebody, listen, we need to think if in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, we had people like Milton Keynes and Schumpeter, and they were thinking about economic models and so on. Why have we become so lazy that we're still using the same models instead of improving the thinking between then and now? And so I come to this discussion more from that perspective and with similar but different questions. One thing is, speaking with a friend in India, I found out that a lot of farmers are committing suicide. Suicide rates are much higher among farmers than any other population group in that country. And I told him, well, thankfully in Africa and in Kenya, we haven't got to that rate. But what I can tell you is that farmers do not bring up their children to be farmers. So any little money that any farmer makes is spent on educating their children. And this education is focused on making sure that we get them out of this industry. We make them anything else except farmers. And yet, again, we still all have to eat. So it doesn't make sense. Why are we getting everybody out of farming if we need food? What is it about farming that makes it so unattractive that either on one continent, people are committing suicide, on another continent, people are making a massive exodus from it, and the average age of the farmer is there for 60 in my country, for example. There's no new technological innovation in this field. We're still using, I remember someone saying we're still using hoes which were used 3,000 years before Christ. So what's happening here? What's wrong with this picture? And so that kind of is what drives me. The second question is around commodities and interesting questions like the world's largest exporter of coffee is Germany. This is a country that does not, exporter of coffee is Germany.
What?
This is a country that does not grow a single coffee plant. I was in a really heated exchange once with a white person who white-splained a few things to me, like coffee has to be processed close to the consumers because it loses its, I don't know, flavor or something if it's processed far away. And I said, excuse me, that doesn't make sense to me still, because then the businesses that own the processing plants in Hamburg should still be African or Colombian or something. Come on, it's us who grow the coffee. How is it that it's German businesses which make the most money out of this? So really heated exchange about that, but it's not the only commodity where it's grown in Latin America or Africa. It's coffee, it's tea, it's cotton. It's used everywhere in the world, and the farmers make maybe, I don't know, less than 10% of the final value. And even that is me being generous, because I was reading a study somewhere, and it's like 20% of a commodity price goes to the country. So if Kenya produces coffee, 20% of the final value of coffee comes to my country in export value, but then the farmer gets only less than 20% of that. So farmers are getting, I don't know, less than 10% of anything that they're producing. So of course it makes sense that suddenly cocoa farmers are not are reducing their cocoa production or getting out of it. Coffee farmers in Kenya are getting out of coffee production. Cotton farmers got out of cotton production in my country, but even in the countries where they're doing it now, they're going to go. It's not sustainable. This is no longer a sustainable model. And so for me, that's where I am at, and what drives me and what brings me into this conversation to say, we need to make a change. And I'm happy to be in this conversation as opposed to one, let's say, with the United Nations or with, I don't know, ICRAF, because they are still not yet at the point where they realize this is just not working. So we're still perpetrating the same model that got us where we are now.
Yeah, no. I'm not sure they're not seeing it. They just don't know how to get there. And we're independent. And that's also what I value very much in this conversation. That's nobody here is driven by a monetary incentive, because there is no money in this project at the moment. Maybe there never will be. So this is why I think the question for asking the motivation from all of us is a crucial question. And I can really relate to your thinking there, which is very related to how I see it, maybe even more concrete than how I see it. Okay, so well, we can speak until my doorbell rings, but that might happen in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
So, do you think that, given our overlapping motivations here, and the current state of the conversation, that we're on a good path? And if not, what should be the next best step?
I think we are on a good path. I'm comfortable that we are on a good path. I don't know if we all feel within the group the same way. So that would be kind of, for me, the next step, understanding if everybody feels that we are on a good path. And if not, what does it take to bring us all to the place where they feel we're in a good path? And the reason I bring this up is that there was a big discussion around, we need to get to know each other better. These are the stages of forming a group. We are not yet even at this stage. And I thought, okay, then maybe we need to find a way to make space for that conversation.
Okay.
So that's the open conversation for me, that if there are people who feel we need to spend a bit more time on it, then let's find space and make it a bit more comfortable for them to be part of this conversation. So that's one part. And the other, so that was one for me, like, okay, if we're not all at the same place, then we need to kind of find a way to come. And the other was, okay, so what's the approach to do this? Maybe that's because I'm a facilitator, so I'm always thinking about how do we do this? How do we make this happen? And at that point, I started thinking maybe the conference might be too big an objective at this stage before we have the internal conversation within the group. And I'm not sure if by the group we mean the core group, or if by the group we mean, it might be two conversations, the core group conversation and then the extra group conversation, the people who were brought into the community.
So when I talk about the group, I refer to the core group.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have that conversation within the group, and then we need to decide if the next step is to have the same conversation within the wider community that we consider the motherland community. So kind of that. I had the doorbell.
But I think we got to a good point. Let me have the conversation with some other people also later today, if you have time. You're welcome and free to join.
Okay.
And I will also record that for further reference. And then once we're done that, and if that is similar to your impressions, then if you're interested, we could do the this facilitation together.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah? Okay.
Great.
Elizabeth.
All the best with your apartment.
Thank you. See you later.
Okay, bye.